Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Bet on Soldier Bloodsport for PC. This is a first-person shooter by the French studio that I don't know whether it's pronounced Kiloton or Kiloton. At any rate, they were formerly 4X Studios who made the game Ironstorm. And this is actually a sort of spiritual successor to some degree to Ironstorm. Although you wouldn't really know that if you didn't know the guys who made Bet on Soldier also made Ironstorm, and you can see some parallels between them. At any rate, it got a fairly mixed reception when it came out, and it only really saw any amount of success in the European market, which led to it getting two expansions, which are Bet on Soldier Blood of Sahara and Bet on Soldier Blackout on Saigon. But those aren't available in the English market, so the question becomes, how is Bet on Soldier? Is it an improvement over the absolutely awful Ironstorm? Does it actually pull off its pretty interesting premise? Or does it basically do the same thing that Ironstorm did, which is present a very cool idea and then execute it terribly? Well, as far as the presentation goes, it is certainly a step up over Ironstorm, although one would hope that, considering this was released 3 years later. Even then, some of the artifacts of Ironstorm are still here. Namely, the often muddy textures with that whole brown and gray and realistic look to them. So there's a distinct lack of color for the most part, except when it goes into the "Welcome to BEEE-OOOH-ESS" cutscenes. And then it just starts flashing things in your face the entire time, so that gets kind of annoying. But really the biggest issues in terms of visuals are in the inconsistency, as well as the shader effects and the animations. See, the animations are at least slightly better than Ironstorm's. At least now you actually manipulate the weapons and you actually remove and insert magazines and things like that. And the characters actually move slightly more like characters this time around, like actual sort of people. They're still incredibly stiff and robotic, but at least they look a bit more like people this time around. And this time around you also have some nice effects with regards to the armor being blasted off of enemies and things like that. So at least there's those things. But the animations just are very awkward and sluggish. And with regards to the weapons you're using, apparently every single weapon in this game operates from an open bolt, except for the pistols. And I say that because you pull the charging handle, which apparently also ejects the magazine, so I don't even know how this is going to work. But then you just stick a new mag in without using the charging handle or anything like that. So again, my guess is all of these weapons operate from an open bolt, or that the developers just have no idea how guns work, which is probably how it actually was. So again, at least they now manipulate stuff, but it just looks ridiculous. So you have that particular problem. And the shader effects are all over the place. Everyone looks like they're just covered in oil, and it looks horrible. So they're incredibly shiny and look extremely plasticky as a result. Even funnier is the inconsistency. You have situations where the interface does not match what's actually going on in the game. So what you'll have is that the heads-up display and the interface that you're selecting things before a mission will have, say, these engineers or troopers or whatever as white people, but then you get into the game and they're all black. Now, I'm not saying the developers are racist or anything like that. What I'm saying is it's just one of those funny inconsistencies that this game has, and these happen all over the place. Things will look a certain way in the interface, but when you actually get in-game and you have the thing in your inventory and you're actually having it out and using it, it doesn't look the same. And so that sort of thing is just kind of a quirky inconsistency problem that is not really a huge detriment, but it makes you kind of go, huh, on occasion. But then we come to the sound design, and this is where things really fall apart, because the sound effects are terrible in this game. All of the automatic weapons, except for the submachine guns, sound exactly the same. So whether you're using the assault rifles, the commando guns, or the miniguns, they all have the exact same firing sound, which is this incredibly weak stock sound. The submachine guns have an even weaker sound that's the same across all of them. The pistols and the sniper rifles, or the semi-automatic rifles, all have the same sound effects as well. And this just extends to everything in the game. it ends up being completely ridiculous and actually pretty annoying when you're actually having the exact same sound effects for every single thing in this game. And it only makes it worse that none of those sound effects are any good. So, what about the rest of the sound design? Well, the voice acting is somewhere between vaguely competent and so bad it's funny. On the one hand, the main character's voice is done during the cutscenes in between missions, and he just kind of sounds bored the entire time. But his actual voiceovers are not that bad, and some of the main characters don't really have that bad voice acting either. But when you get in game and you're listening to all these soldiers talk, it ends up being silly, because they'll say things that are completely ridiculous, like, "Can you feel my bullets?" Which begs the question, what does that even mean? What were they trying to say here? It becomes more and more obvious the more you play this game that the developers do not have English as their native language, and their English skills are not particularly good. The characters just say these things that do not make any sense whatsoever. And what's even funnier is that the subtitles do not at all match what people are actually saying when you actually pay attention to them. What's even funnier is that, as you'll see in this clip I'm about to show you, they censored some of the language in the subtitles, but not in the actual audio.
Don't stay there, draw! Oh, fuck, it's a dead end!
And you just sit there like, why? As if it weren't enough that we have these characters saying things that don't make any sense to begin with, they go and do things in the subtitles that don't make any sense either. And then there's the music, which features basically the same 3 tracks over and over and over again, one of which is quite literally just looped over and over and over again. It's almost like the entire thought process behind the sound in this game was to either make it as annoying as possible or as completely nonsensical as possible, with sometimes hilarious but mostly annoying results. But as ridiculous as the presentation can be, what really matter here are the story and the gameplay. And the story in this is set in an alternate 1998. Yes, this developer really likes their alternate history stuff, don't they? And the idea here is that a war has been going on for the past 80 years, and they have no idea if it's ever going to stop. So all aspects of society revolve around war. You're either a soldier or you work in a factory to support the war effort. And you're split into 2 different factions. You have the WRF, which is apparently the Western Republic Federation, because that makes sense, right? And the other one is the United Asian Nations, UAN. And in this grim, dark future, you play as Nolan Daneworth, who is a WRF soldier and suffers from amnesia, because of course he does, right? And his backstory is that he started a farm with his wife Julianne, and his farm ended up getting torched by these 3 guys, and his wife got killed, so he goes off to get revenge by re-enlisting in the WRF and entering the Bet on Soldier tournament. Bet on Soldier is the TV program in this universe where these elite soldiers go one-on-one against each other, and everybody bets on the outcome of the fight. So of course, BOS champions make quite a lot of money and live fairly well as far as soldiers go, but in this grim, dark future, there is only war, and they will not live very long. Anyway, when you get into the meat of the plot, you find that there is a so-called resistance going up against a so-called syndicate, which is later revealed to be the military-industrial complex itself, which is trying to create this perpetual war in order to create massive, continuous profits. And that's pretty much the entire plot in a nutshell. Obviously, Nolan's amnesia factors in with the whole syndicate versus resistance thing, and at one point you can actually choose to side with either the resistance or the syndicate, but it doesn't really go anywhere because you're going to basically be doing the same things either way, just on opposing sides, and the ending is the same no matter what you do. And the entire time, you get the feeling like the developers thought that the plot was way better than it actually is, and that it actually has some significant meaning to it. What it ends up being is something completely ridiculous that makes no sense whatsoever, and leaves you going, really? Are you trying to out M. Night Shyamalan? Because that's what it feels like sometimes. and you quickly lose interest in the plot and focus almost entirely on the gameplay. So of course the question becomes, well, how is the gameplay? Because they've set it up fairly interestingly compared to pretty much every other FPS on the market. If you played Counter-Strike, you're no stranger to having to buy your equipment before rounds, and in this case they have buying your equipment before missions in the single player. So each level has a basic payout that if you complete the mission you just get that flat sum, and you also get money for getting kills in the game, also for getting special kills like object kills or headshots, as well as getting money for winning BOS matches. I'll talk more about that in a bit, but when you go into each mission you have a setup phase before you actually start. You get to select which BOS opponents you want to fight, as well as what equipment you get, and as you go through the game you're going to get access to better and better equipment. You start out with really crappy armor and move all the way up to an exosuit. And eventually you get access to better and better weapons like proper sniper rifles that actually have scopes on them, as opposed to the ones you get at the very beginning of the game, which don't have scopes on them. And some of the later weapons have really weird effects. You would expect them to have higher magazine capacities, better rates of fire, more accuracy, things like that. But eventually they start throwing in different modifications to the actual shots, like basically drugging your enemies or blinding them and things like that that don't really make any sense mechanically whatsoever. You have 4 basic weapon slots. The first of them is your melee weapon, and the second is a sidearm, which is either going to be a pistol or a machine pistol, or what is called a pump gun, which is a pump action shotgun, and that's apparently considered a one-handed weapon in this game. The next slot is for your primary weapon, which is going to either be an assault rifle, a commando gun, which is basically just a shortened assault rifle, or lastly, a sniper rifle, which, as I've mentioned, is either a semi-automatic rifle or it's just a proper sniper rifle. And you get another slot for heavy weapons, which is either a missile launcher, a minigun, which is just labeled as a machine gun for some reason, the war shotgun, which is basically just a really big shotgun, or the gas launcher, because apparently they can't spell gas. You also get 3 slots each for grenades, which are going to be 2 different types of grenades. You have your gas grenades and your normal grenades, and you get a slot for shields, which you can have basically a riot shield. Then you move on to selecting mercenaries. Now, you usually get a single mercenary for free, and they're usually an engineer, so they can actually manipulate things in the levels. And engineers can also repair your armor, which is a pretty big deal. You also get access to things like troopers and snipers, which are just there to do damage. I never really found all that much use for them, apart from just being distractions, though. And I'll get more to that in a minute. But when you actually get into the game, you get to actually see how everything fits together. You see, the money mechanic is both for getting your equipment at the beginning of the level, as well as buying ammunition, and buying armor repairs, and buying saves. Yes, you have save ticket machines, and you have to go up to them, and you have to spend your in-game money in order to save the game. Now, it's one thing if you're paying for a refill on your ammo or your armor or whatever, and that's pretty much how Counter-Strike handled things with its in-game currency. But when you're also paying for saves, and you can only do it at specific save points, that's just what you call a dick move. Luckily, it's in-game currency that usually you have plenty of when you're getting to those save points, but it's just something that feels horribly wrong when you're actually in-game. Like, I shouldn't have to pay for the ability to save my frickin' game. And oddly enough, this isn't the only game I've seen do something like this. I've also seen it in the ESRB series, where the first game actually required you to pay gold pieces in order to save your game. Oddly enough, it's also a French game. I don't know whether that's relevant or not, but I guess it's worth mentioning because it's just kind of a weird coincidence. At any rate, when you're actually going through the levels, you find that you can't pick up weapons or ammunition from fallen enemies. You have to buy every single ammo refill. And you can't swap your weapons in a mission. You have to pick exactly what you want and what you know you're going to need in a mission beforehand. So if you don't know you're going to go up against, say, a bunch of mech suits, then you're going to have a bad time, because now you're not equipped to deal with them, and you're only equipped to deal with infantry. And infantry are very, very easy to take down. All it takes is basically one headshot after you've knocked their helmet off. And that's something that's very interesting about this game. It does have some pretty significant location-based damage, mostly because you have to damage their armor in order to get to their flesh underneath. And once you've gotten through their armor, they're very easy to take down. You're actually the same way. You have various bits of armor, and if they get too damaged, they will fall apart, and you will take more damage. Now, you can't actually heal when you're in a mission either, so you have to constantly keep your armor repair up. And this is where engineers come in really handy, because you can order them to repair your armor for free. So the engineer is pretty much vital to have with you. You want at least one engineer with you at all times so they can repair your armor. Unfortunately, this brings up a pretty major issue in this game. The AI is awful across the board. Whether you're dealing with the very stupid enemies who just kind of sit there in the open and let themselves get shot to bits, or stand next to those explodey barrels that are very, very dangerous to be around, or they'll stand in a spot where somehow they can't see you, but you're right in their face basically, and you can just annihilate them incredibly easily. The friendly AI does pretty much exactly the same thing, the difference being that you can order them around a bit, although it's very, very rudimentary commands and you can't really do all that much with it other than basically say, follow me or stay put, or repair my armor. That's pretty much it. And unfortunately, you have to rely on them to complete objectives, because they'll have to go up to, say, a computer and magically wave their hands around, because that's what the animation is, and somehow that'll open doors, or it will destroy the enemy's artillery piece or whatever. It all gets pretty annoying having to put up with the AI getting caught on things and getting itself shot to bits. So you find that the AI is not really helpful, and it's not really a hindrance when you're actually fighting the enemy. The only thing that's good about the enemy AI is their accuracy. They're generally pretty good shots and can hit you from rather long distances with a fair amount of accuracy. And it only gets more ridiculous when you're in a mech suit, because the enemy mech suits are really the only thing that's actually kind of dangerous to you, and that's only because they can do a lot of damage. So you're just laying waste to their entire army, and then suddenly a mech suit comes up and takes you down to half health almost instantly. So now you're kind of screwed. But at the same time, you can just kind of annihilate them incredibly quickly with a mech suit, so it doesn't really matter all that much. That said, running over enemies in a mech suit because they refuse to get out of your way is pretty amusing, because, let's face it, watching them ragdoll all over the place is always funny. But that's really all that's worth mentioning about mech suits in this game, is that they take a fair amount of damage from enemy small arms, but against other mechs they just get annihilated incredibly quickly. And you find that they're just kind of sluggish and annoying. The only real advantage you get with them is the amount of firepower you can put out. At least they offer a brief respite from the rather boring FPS combat where you're just doing the exact same thing over and over again, which is basically go for the eyes, boo, go for the eyes. And it's incredibly easy to take out almost all of the enemies in this game, except for mech suits and for the BOS champions. Now this brings me to the BOS bit, where you end up going in a one-on-one deathmatch against the BOS champions, who are basically just super powered, and they can be pretty annoying because a lot of them have magnetic shields that will just absorb all of your shots, and thus you do no damage to them. And they have very thick armor, which means that you need to do a lot of damage to them in order to expose the flesh underneath and actually be able to take them out. So they're basically bullet sponges, and if that wasn't enough, you get 1 minute to defeat them. Exactly 60 seconds in order to take these enemies down, and they're basically mini-bosses. If you don't manage to defeat them, then you don't get the money for it, and your amount of money that you will earn from this particular match goes down over time. So the faster you beat the BOS champion, the better. But then there's the problem of the story-based BOS matches, where if you lose the mission and have to start over from the last save point, which hopefully was right there, because if it wasn't, then you're going to have to traverse another large part of the level. which is a lot of very, very tedious combat. And these enemies can get incredibly annoying, because some of them will have things like blinding projectiles that will just blind you, and thus you can't even see what you're doing. Or some of them have hallucinogenic shots that will just make you wobble all over the place and make it next to impossible to hit anything and actually function. Actually makes it kind of sick to your stomach too, because it's wobbling around so quickly and throws so much blur on the screen. And so these fights actually do more to hurt the game than to help it, even though they kind of break up the monotony a bit. It's not in a good way. And that's kind of the problem with a lot of this game. It's either incredibly monotonous and boring, or outright irritating. There's not really anything in between. There's not really any moments in this game where it's actually fun. It's more you're making fun of how bad it is than anything else. So what you have here overall is an FPS with a pretty awful presentation, some terrible writing, awful dialogue, sometimes hilarious but mostly just annoying, some rather tedious gameplay in general that just drags on and on and on, with bits to sort of break up the monotony that really don't do anything to help it out any. So altogether, it's just a mess. Now, I do have to say one thing in the game's favor. It's better than Ironstorm, but that's really not saying much. At least the game is playable, I guess, but it's just not enjoyable in the slightest, and I cannot for the life of me figure out why it managed to do so well in the European market that it got 2 expansion packs. It's another prime example of a really cool concept done really poorly. And it's really a shame, because I hoped this game would be good, but it isn't. I give it a 1.5 out of 5. Thanks for watching.